Jennifer, you ready? Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the April 10th, 2018 meeting of the Lawrence City Commission. Tonight we have our regular meeting, which will consist of the consent agenda, and then that will be followed by a work session. So we'll start with the first item on our agenda, which is proclamations, which we have none. So we'll go on to item B, which is the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled off the consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. So, anybody want to remove anything up here from the consent agenda? Anybody from the public want to remove anything from the consent agenda? All right. Do we have a motion then?
So moved.
The claims, that's right.
I don't have the claims.
We don't have them.
Oh, well, okay. Then I'll just state what's on the claim.
Okay.
That's fine. We have claims and payroll in the amount of $4,721,552.72 to 243 vendors.
Okay, thank you, Sherry. All right, so a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, so we have a motion by Commissioner Soden and a second by Commissioner Nanda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So we'll move on to public comment. Anybody have general public comment? Yeah, just let me read real quick, Frank, the rules. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled on the consent agenda or regular agenda portions of the agenda, after first being recognized by the mayor. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment as a general practice. The commission will not discuss, debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up, if necessary. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments and questions directly to the commission.
Thank you. I'm Frank Jansen, 33 New Hampshire Street. I have 2 brief items. One of them is sort of housekeeping. I don't know if it can be anything done. There have been times when people come here in wheelchairs. The 2 outside doors have buttons to push, open the door. This door behind me does not. So if somebody comes and need help, I guess somebody will help them open the door. Anyway, last Wednesday was my birthday. Now, on my birthday, I often ask people, what's the historical event that happened? This year, most people know what happened on April 4th, 50 years ago, 1968. Martin Luther King was killed. Martin Luther King was killed on my birthday. Now, here in Lawrence, we have the Langston Hughes information. We have the quote from him outside. We have Langston Hughes School. We have the statue of Langston Hughes at the Watkins Museum. And currently in Kansas City, Missouri, they want to change the name of the Paseo to Martin Luther King Boulevard. Here in Lawrence, what have we got? Not a single Martin Luther King anything. No schools, no streets, nothing for Martin Luther King. I would suggest we get some kind of a name here in Lawrence for Martin Luther King. In addition, in 2 days is the regular Lawrence NAACP meeting. It's every second Thursday of the month, 6:30 at the United Way building at 2518 Ridge Court. You can come day after tomorrow to that meeting. I have a membership card. You can get one too. You can come to that meeting to discuss Martin Luther King and how we can name something after him here in Lawrence. Thanks.
Thanks, Frank. Any other public comment? Seeing none, then we'll bring it back to the commission and move on to item D on our agenda, which is commission items. Do we have anything? No city manager's report. And then our last item on our regular agenda is our calendar meeting list. Anybody have anything to add to the list? Nope. We're good? All right.
So I move to adjourn the regular city commission meeting so we can move into the work session.
Second.
All right, I have a motion to adjourn from Commissioner Soden and a second by Commissioner Ananda. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So now we'll move into the work session. The work session provides an opportunity for the City Commission to discuss items in greater detail. As a general practice, the Commission will not make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Public comment related to the work session topics will be allowed at the end of this discussion of each item. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes for public comment. So we'll start with item 1, which is a discussion with the Transportation Commission regarding goals and priorities.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dave Cronin, City Engineer in the Public Works Department. A little over a year ago, the City Commission approved a resolution that established the Transportation Commission in order to encourage strong multimodal transportation planning and review projects and programs that provide access for all residents in the community. Attached to the memo that you have in front of you tonight is the Transportation Commission's authority and purpose as stated in their bylaws. And in summary, the Transportation Commission is a recommending body to the City Commission on transportation-related policies, programs, and projects. This past January, the Transportation Commission held a retreat to discuss its goals for 2018, and the purpose of the study session tonight is for the Transportation Commission to discuss the goals and expectations with the City Commission and get some feedback from you. I would say one thing that we've identified as we've been having these meetings over the past year is with the staff concern and some of the commission's concern is the amount of time that we've spent on smaller type items like signing requests and no parking requests. And I think we would like to try to refine that process, and there's some things that we would need to do to amend some ordinances that we could do some of these requests administratively. We spend a lot of time reviewing some of these requests, and I think that's one thing that we've identified a need to look at going forward so that the Transportation Commission can spend more of their time on big picture items. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chairperson Aaron Payton to kind of go over some of the goals that they've identified with a work session.
Good evening, Commissioners. So as Dave mentioned, the 2018 Transportation Commission goals and retreat summary is in your packet, but I wanted to kind of go over those, and also I have a couple particular questions that I thought would be good to be addressed at this session. So this year we plan on recommending a new traffic calming policy to the City Commission. It will be staff-driven with input from the Transportation Commission. We plan on recommending a new complete streets policy. This will be subcommittee-driven with input from the Transportation Commission. We also are developing a 5-year spending plan for the sidewalk bike ped improvements and ADA ramp line item in the CIP. The spending plan for that, or our input for that, will be based on the new non-motorized project prioritization policy. That's how we're ranking those projects. We just tried that policy out for the first time at our last April 2nd, our last meeting. So kind of getting an idea how that works. So that is one of the items I thought could be addressed tonight. That policy was a policy that was going to go to City Commission, and it ended up being made a Transportation Commission policy. And I know Mayor Boley and Transportation Commissioner Evans and I and Jennifer Nanda spoke about how that policy works and what the role is of that policy on Transportation Commission and City Commission. And so I was hoping maybe we could get a clarification just to identify what the idea was in making that specifically Transportation Commission, a Transportation Commission policy. I thought that would just help us all out, if that makes sense. So the other items that we discussed at our retreat was more awareness for the planned CIP projects, involvement and consultation on large-scale transit concerns, involvement and consultation in the downtown master plan, and as Mr. Cronin already mentioned, larger scale decisions rather than we were spending a lot of time focusing on things like no parking, signs, and items like that. So I think that one thing would be that we focus more of our attention on broader policies. So we also discussed staying engaged in the sidewalk maintenance discussion and policy development. Just we think that that was part of the pedestrian bicycle issues task force recommendations. In the final report, it mentioned that Transportation Commission should look at that and sort of see that through. So I don't know if there's any questions or comments or.
Should we give our input now, or how do you think that we should structure this?
We could go ahead and do it now, that'd be fine. Is anybody else going to speak from the Transportation Commission?
I imagine if there are other commissioners that are seeking specific answers that they will come and
Okay.
speak, yes.
Well, if you have questions, or I have a couple.
Yeah.
You want to
I
go
have a
ahead?
couple
Go ahead.
too. I remember when we were first creating the Transportation Commission where we were kind of merging things, and at the time there was some confusion with me, and I think a couple other commissioners, I don't remember for sure, but I thought that we were also merging the Transit Advisory Board, I guess, or Advisory Board, into Transportation, and we didn't. So, so I'm very much personally in favor of you looking more at transit issues, but I also was interested in just kind of merging the two together a little more and not having a separate transit advisory.
And I don't know that I can answer this, but I remember some of that discussion was that PTAC is very big, like they discuss a lot, and it would be hard to merge them completely, so it was more of Transportation Commission needed to be more involved in maybe some of the decisions made at PTAC.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the decision was made, it did not seem possible to merge them, so, but I don't know if somebody else might be able to.
Yeah. Would it be helpful to have like one or two people on the Transportation Commission that are a dedicated transit seat? Would that be helpful?
I could see that that might be helpful.
How many people are on the Transportation Commission?
9.
Yeah. So I wouldn't want to make it too much bigger than that.
And we have one member of PTAC that's on.
Make sure you come up to the,
We have, currently have one member of PTAC that's on the Transportation Commission.
oh, we have it currently.
We have one member, yeah.
And they speak specifically for transit perspective?
That's their,
Or do
that's
they
their
just-
role. I mean,
Okay,
we've
good.
identified some of these different positions from different agencies or organizations. They're still to consider the big picture, but they are there to speak on transit issues.
Excellent.
So my question would be if you've got two different advisory boards talking about transit, does that get confusing? Would that get, where's the authority lie?
I believe it's more making Transportation Commission aware of what's going on with transit,
So that would
which
be,
there does seem to be a little gap there. Now that we're discussing this, it does seem like we're not as aware, we haven't really discussed what's going on
with
with
PTAC.
transit, yeah.
Wasn't that the point
So-
of putting the PTAC
Yeah,
person on
yeah.
the?
So does
So
the
maybe
P-
that's something that we need to add to sort of our reports or commission items at the end of the meeting.
Yeah. So how would you view the role of the Transportation Commission regarding transit as far as decision-making?
I can tell you how I would. I mean, I think that one of the issues is making all those modes fit right, or operate well together, which I think we have a long way to go. But that would be one thing that I feel like is maybe being overlooked right now, and that is that if you don't know how, say, transit is changing, and I don't think we've paid enough attention to that, then it's probably not as clear how other things need to fit together as well.
So maybe that needs to be, because it seems to me it would get awful confusing if we've got two different boards addressing the same transit or issue.
Yeah.
So how would you?
I don't want it to just be where PTAC reports to transportation. I want like more of a back and forth collaboration happening rather than just a one-way reporting.
Mm-hmm.
So would you view them as a role, the Transportation Commission as serving a role of making a decision or sending forth policy to?
It's almost like maybe PTAC would be better served if it was a subcommittee under the Transportation Commission and had the same staff liaison in some fashion. I mean, this isn't something I've really brainstormed a lot about. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip right now and remembering the conversation that we had in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But that is something that was important to me, that we have a true collaboration, because like one thing that I mentioned was when we talked about transit funding, and we were also talking about sidewalks, one thing that I mentioned was, well, we need sidewalks where there are bus stops, you know, so that people don't have to walk through 10 feet of muddy grass or snow or whatever to board the bus. So there just needs to be more collaboration. And it sounds like you all think that as well.
Yeah, I actually have. I don't think we've discussed it that much, and so this is interesting because it is. I'm thinking about this now, and you make a good point on sidewalks, and that's. I mean, we're really trying to address some of the deficits and where sidewalks need to go, and safe routes to school, and so. Like I said, we definitely need more collaboration, so that's something we should be looking into. And as I mentioned before, I think that it was transit. City staff might be better at answering this, but transit is such a big budget and has so many factors that need to be considered that it wasn't part of our.
Oh, that's right. It had to do with federal funding, didn't it? Yeah.
That they have to have
Their own. I remember now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they have to be separate.
That's right.
Okay. Now, you'd also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to follow up and say, just, you know, if that's something you guys might ruminate more on, how you'd like to collaborate better, I'd be open for suggestions.
Great.
In the future.
Okay.
So you also talked about the sidewalk policy, because the policy has been set for now.
Right.
So when you say you would like to be more involved with the policy, can you give me an idea of what you mean by that?
You'll have to excuse me. This is, I guess, a couple months old. But I think it's that we want to be sure to follow it and see how things are panning out. I think that's pretty important to see how that policy does in coming years. I think it'd probably be hard to avoid, though. I think it'll be around. So it's more of a following that policy and making sure it's working like it should. By which I mean sidewalks are being repaired and they're, you know.
Okay.
Question, if
Yeah.
you're,
Yeah, go ahead.
sure. On number 4, where you talk about kind of elimination of the minutia of it all, and I get that, you know, we deal with a lot of minutia, and the bigger issues are always more exciting, but my question would be, if the Transportation Commission no longer deals with the smaller ticket items, do the individuals involved in those smaller ticket items effectively lose their due process? If it becomes solely a city staff decision, do they ever see a day before? I mean, some of the issue, as it stands now, the issue gets brought to the Transportation Commission. Transportation Commission renders a decision, at which point it gets put on a commission consent agenda and generally passes through unless it's pulled. But if we remove the Transportation Commission from the picture, does there exist any element of due process for that individual?
Right. I was somewhat concerned about this, but there's an appeal process. So they're able to appeal a decision that is made by city staff, which would come to us, and then you, unless I'm incorrect in stating that. But I was somewhat concerned about this because there were things that city staff had decided that we maybe reversed. And so I think that is a concern, but I think if there's an appeal process, it is, I think, pretty critical to start considering the larger picture items. So,
So would they like come on a consent agenda type? Is that how that would, Dave?
That's the way I would envision it. Yeah, I think there needs to be a process that they can appeal a decision, but, you know, we haven't worked out what exactly that would be. I think we just identified the need to, you know, reduce some of the discussions. We've had long discussions on some of these items that we get into the weeds on things when I think the commission as a whole thinks they should be thinking of bigger things. So, you know, we just kind of threw that out there that we need to have more discussion. There's examples where, you know, if we want to put a stop sign in, we can do that administratively on an emergency basis for 90 days, but then it needs an ordinance to get adopted, and it goes through being an ordinance in 2 readings, and it comes before you. I think there's other communities in Kansas. I don't think there's a defined statute, and I need to review this a little further, but other communities that install stop signs and don't go through that whole ordinance process. So I think there's some things that, you know, not everything we're going to try to make the staff decisions. I think we need to have some guidelines and criteria on what those are, but I would expect that we'd still have a process to appeal anything that we decided.
Thank you.
I would like to see a consent agenda item for those things so that we, the Transportation Commission, can kind of see what's going on. We had a couple of things come up that the city would have said no to that I thought were really important, and it was just, I kind of feel like something was missed, and it was a particular street that operates a lot for pedestrians, and that was sort of why we sort of disagreed with that recommendation. And so I think it's important that we're able to see where things like that are added, so that's something that I would probably like to see on a future agenda, and that's that stuff like that become consent agenda items.
So to be clear, are you talking about a consent agenda item on the Transportation Committee? Because I thought what you were saying was on the City Commission agenda.
What would it need to be?
Well, I think we would, in the past, we've presented these items on the Transportation Commission, so it could be a consent type item. Now, they are just a recommending body, but if, you know, that's, I think we need to have more discussions on what the protocol would be if you would have a consent item on that, for that board or not, but.
I think, you know, in general terms and not specific to this issue alone, where I think where you probably reduce the amount of deflection towards a lot of minutia, which I think some of these have been described at in terms of reviewing this. They're not minutia to the neighborhoods, but
Right.
on the grand scheme of things, that, you know, in general, I think you'd want to be recommending a policy with standards in the policy for how, and then that would be administratively reviewed and applied. The policy, in my opinion, should be, you know, recommended by the Transportation Committee, approved by the City Commission, and then managed by the administrative staff. That's typically the way we deal with something like that. So.
Okay.
Well, it sounds good to me. I personally was really open to everything that they recommended. I'd be interested in seeing, you know, how they actually come to be, of course, but.
Yeah, I do think there's a need to get, to make sure that the time by the Transportation Commission is, that their time is used to address some of the bigger issues that are definitely facing our community and transportation. given how much change we've had just even the past few years. So I think finding a way to do that, but yet still preserving the citizens' rights, I think, is going to be key. Yeah, Tom?
Can we back up a second to the transit discussion?
Mhm.
I think one of the things, I think Leslie was correct, I think part of the discussion about leaving that transit board in play was because of federal funding considerations. I think ridership, you know, and the number of issues you deal with ridership and how you're gonna run the system and all that. And I do think that transit member, if I recall correctly, was to create that relationship issue between the two. But over time, that can evolve like everything else. So I think your direction to the Transportation Commission is good, that they continue to monitor that relationship. Maybe they have a joint meeting with the Transit Committee at some point, you know, to explore how that interrelationship occurs without getting too deep into those issues. At some point in the future, the commission may want to change that relationship, but I think that designee position was to try and just build the relationship collaboration between the two.
Requires kind of an assertive personality too, on both sides.
Yeah. Well, they could be reporting out what the Transit Committee does regularly at the Transportation Commission meeting, so that they're giving an update about what's going on over there all the time too. And I don't know if that's occurring right now, just as a standard feature
No.
of your agendas.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where it needs to begin, is with that relationship, and then see where it goes from there. But I could see the importance of having that communication open. So like,
Yeah, if you have other suggestions for how you want to tinker with it or what you want to do, I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, we'll discuss that with Bob Nugent, the transit supervisor as well, to see if he has any ideas on that. But a lot of the stuff they do is operational type discussion and routing, and
Right.
some of that stuff is, that too would be, to have all of those items on a Transportation Commission agenda. Those discussions may be too much detail for the time that we have, but we'll see if there's some kind of reporting structure that we can keep them informed of what's going on with PTAC in the loop with our Transportation Commission.
okay. Any
Yeah.
other questions for?
I think
Mayor?
that, speaking to the conversation that occurred with Mayor Bully, and I don't want to speak for him at all, but I think that there was concern with the prioritization policy language. And a bit of it, I think, was semantics because it's more procedure than policy, really. But having policy that was to come to the commission for review or approval or comment or recommendations, for the way that those things are prioritized, was just a conversation that wasn't had at the time and hasn't occurred. So that, I think, was the reason that we kind of brought that forward, and I'm glad that you brought it up today.
Yeah, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this, maybe the concern was whether we're both making decisions. I mean, the things that we recommend go to you, and so making sure that, I guess, decisions were being made based on the same sort of criteria or policies, or knowing why or where our decisions came from. And there was concern that maybe those wouldn't align. So I figured perhaps maybe city staff could just clarify that. I mean, I don't think it matters. I think it's a really great policy. I mean, how it will work, I don't know, but that it's there and that it tries to address so many difficult factors in pedestrian and bicycle funding and projects, I think is really great. So I don't know if city staff could just explain. I mean, I really feel like a lot of these were for Mayor Bully, but I'm sure he'll watch this. So why that was made a Transportation Commission policy, or what difference it makes, I guess.
There was also, I think I received some concerns that there wasn't an opportunity for public comment on that before it was implemented or adopted, and maybe I'm wrong if it was in front of the Transportation Commission with an opportunity for public comment.
Several times.
Okay.
We had opportunities for public comment.
Okay. Any other, anything else?
I think Brandon would like to make a comment.
Sure.
Behind me.
I can respond a little bit to that. Yes, our office did review the proposed policy, and it was our understanding that the Transportation Commission was tasked with coming up with some standards to help evaluate certain recommendations regarding improvements throughout the community related to transportation. And we wanted to keep it as a Transportation Committee policy because as drafted, it appeared to require certain funding to be automatic. And as you know, the City Commission has to maintain flexibility to address whatever financial situations you may be facing. And if there was a policy binding you to make certain expenditures based on a policy, that would take away some of your flexibility in case there was some sort of emergency situation where you had to redirect funds to a non-transportation item. So, you know, those funding decisions need to be made by you. You can certainly consider recommendations, and obviously you want to make sure that you're evaluating those you know, according to procedures. That's all good and well, but we wanted to make sure that you and future commissions had flexibility to evaluate those.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful, for me anyway.
Okay. Anything else, Erin?
That's all I have.
Okay.
I don't know if there are other transportation commissioners that would have specific questions or.
Steve? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Steve Evans. Just a couple of things to add to what Erin said. Matt, I think your question about the consent agenda and the intent there is really good. And I'd offer that a year ago, we kind of walked in, we had a lot to learn, and we still do. I think that our accountability and responsibility in a consent type approach would be, it's our responsibility to look that over and look it over in detail. And with the background and the knowledge, the experience we have now, I think we're capable of doing that. Some of the things that Erin mentioned, we you know, had some lively discussion with Dave and staff about, and I think it's really our responsibility now to look at those things, should we go in that direction, and pull them if we need to. Should we have a consent agenda within our commission, if that's helpful. I also have asked myself in the last year, you know, what filter to put a lot of this stuff through. And I know that you guys deal with this a lot too, in dealing, you know, keeping the lights on, keeping the roads running, and just kind of the basic stuff versus maybe a little more lofty vision and goal in terms of what we can do for Lawrence down the road. I think our folks have heard me say this a lot, and I was in Davis, California last year, and in 1967 they put their first bike lane in. And it's 50 years later, and that city it'll blow your mind if you see what's going on in Davis. And I'm not sitting here saying tomorrow Lawrence can have that, but I just kind of always ask myself, you know, in the midst of the, you know, the minutia that we deal with, what is it we're doing to look out that far? And what could Lawrence be like in 10 years, 20 years, 30, and 50? And I really think it's our responsibility to look at those things in the context of transportation issues, which is transit, biking, cars, you know, everything. And I just wanted to throw that out there, that I think in the back of all of our minds, we'd like to you know, look at that vision. I see your critical factors of success, and that's a good filter too for us. The Transportation 2040 plan is a good filter for us. But I just wanted to offer that, you know, as, you know, we're right here, but I think we need to be up here at the same time and looking way down the road and how we can affect that.
Thanks, Steve.
Regarding that, I don't know that it would be a consent agenda item, but to ensure due process, would it be possible, city staff doesn't have to answer this now, but would it be possible to have some sort of consent agenda or some sort of, here's what we approved this week, here's the signs, or here are the things we turned down this week and here's why, and that to continue on to City Commission, also just our recommendation. I don't know if that makes sense. Just so, like I mentioned before, we can see what's happening. That way it ensures due process, and if there's anything that seems like it doesn't make sense, we can pull it and say, hey, let's look at this more clearly. So I'll just throw that out there and see.
Okay, thanks. Thanks. I would imagine if it were a consent agenda type process, that it could be pulled by the public or
Yeah, I was
the
going to say, I don't
commission.
think you're going to save any time doing it that way, because ultimately, anyone that wants to have a public hearing is going to show up and pull it, and you're going to have the same level of engagement you would have had it been agenda item number 1. Now it's just agenda item 1A, having been pulled.
So how would
And
you-
any item that nobody in the public was going to speak to, nobody was going to speak to had it been on the regular agenda anyway, and it would have been over and done with. So I think your idea behind that's to speed it up, but I don't know that in practice that would actually occur.
And the only way is if, you know, for items that weren't pulled, of course, you wouldn't have to hear a presentation. Is that where the time gets involved, is having to hear a
Do any of
presentation?
our advisory boards have consent agendas?
I don't know, is that even possible?
I guess that's something I'd want to kick around with staff a little bit, just to have that conversation.
It almost defeats the purpose of an advisory board if it's just a city.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
I think
HRC
in an
has-
advisory nature, it's kind of, it just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't ring the same way as it does with a
Right.
legislative body that's making final decisions.
It's almost like it's something, it is different, but
Yeah.
HRC has some kind of part of their agenda that's administrative approval, don't they?
Yeah, when I hear Aaron speak, I'm thinking about a model HRC employees where staff is actually deciding the issue, and we report it on HRC's agenda each month. And HRC doesn't get to decide differently, but they can bring up any one of the projects as an example to talk about policy and code and sort of redirect staff from that point forward. It's not a consent agenda as much
Yeah.
as it's a reporting agenda.
That's a model I'm more familiar with
it's
in terms of
almost like a city
process.
manager's report.
Yeah, we report out, the public knows, and if you have some sort of appeal procedure built into that, that's separate and distinct.
Okay.
But to have staff manage it and then turn around and then have a process where the transportation committee could literally take every one of them and
Right.
turn it down, and, you know, that doesn't, in an advisory board role, that doesn't seem consistent. So. But I get the point about due process at the same time. They want their day in court or in front of the commission, so we have to figure that part of it out.
And it does sound like there would be several steps involved before that was a possibility. We'd have to change our ordinance. We would also have to develop the policy that would allow that to occur. So there would be many more conversations, I think, on the
Yeah.
process with that, as well as developing an appeal process as well.
I just think that if you had a good policy to begin with for the administration, it would be clear which ones are kind of, they're just,
straightforward.
they're slam dunks. And then those that have a more higher degree of difficulty, which might require some additional scrutiny. that would take work on the Transportation Committee to work with staff and develop that kind of a policy so that truly was being administratively handled after the policy was adopted, but that's where their input would come in.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is Catherine Schartz, and I wanted to address that too. Kind of what he was talking about in terms of thinking about the long-term plans. One of the things that we're working on now is the Complete Streets policy. And we've talked a lot about how the goal for that is to come up with a policy that sort of describes what the long-term goals are and what we want to happen. And then within that, we would have sort of an algorithm that then the city managers could use to make those decisions that we're calling minutia right now, but they're not really. It's just that those are things that would be built into the policy. So that our role as the Transportation Commission is to come up with that sort of bigger picture and design an algorithm that works most of the time. And then we've also talked about having the exceptions to all of these rules. You know, anytime you have something that's an outlier, or when you have somebody who feels strongly that in this case that isn't going to work, then that would come up for us to discuss. But in general, those, you know, every single speed bump and every single stop sign doesn't have to have a 20-minute discussion at the meeting. It would be built in. You know, they sort of have an algorithm right now, but they bring that to us and we discuss those. And if we made that, you know, a little bit more encompassing, it might save time so that we could work on those the bigger picture and the long-term goals.
I think that's
right.
really a very solid comment. And I think the other advantage of having that kind of consistency is it's more defensible.
Right. It also goes hand in hand with the fact that we don't even fund all the approvals.
See, that was always the
Yeah.
biggest, and this goes back,
Yeah.
this predates Tom.
Right.
But I remember, you know, early 2015, we had an individual come before us in public comment and say, you know, hey, I brought this speed bump issue to at the time it was, you know, the Traffic Safety Commission, and they approved it in 2013. When's it going to happen? And our response back was, you're like 39th on the list.
Yeah.
You know,
You move right into the queue.
yeah, exactly. And so I don't know, probably by the time you sell your house and move away, we'll fix the problem. And, you know, it's because you've got a legislative body that has to deal with a purse, and then you've got an advisory body that simply deals with, is it a good or a bad idea? And you can say a lot of things are a good idea and not be able to pay for them with the purse. And that was a huge obstacle for the public because that wasn't clearly understood, that a lot of people were coming out of traffic safety thinking, hey, we got our day, we were victorious, tomorrow they're going to construct this traffic calming device and the world will be right, and that wasn't happening. In fact, when it came back, I think, Dave, you brought back a year later, we had our top 10 list, and there was one that we removed because it had been requested so far long ago, we couldn't even find the people who had originally requested it, and
So
it was kind of a disaster. So
you know, I think that definitely kind of proves the point that.
yeah.
So I think that's good. Anything else from the? Anything else? Public comment now on this specific item? Any public comment? None? Then we'll bring it back to the commission. Anybody want anything, any
I
other
don't have
thoughts?
I don't have anything more to add, you know, I'm just open to the suggestions they have, and I think it's great. Thank you for your service, of course, appreciate that.
Sure.
So more transit collaboration is what we get out of this and how we're going to go about that. And then some policy that makes it possible for us to clearly have staff take care of those minutia items.
Administrative approval stuff. Is there anything else you need a direct response to us on this?
No, I think also that the explanation on the non-motorized prioritization policy is great. So really
I think your
appreciate it.
goals, your larger goals are really important to really start focusing on, because I know the community's been asking, I've been getting comments about it, so I
Great.
would appreciate that.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was going to ask Stuart, obviously he's not here tonight, but within the context of this, of transportation and advisory boards, about where we're at on the progress. I know PTAC has had a vacant position since December, and where we were at in that process of filling that vacancy.
I know.
So,
We
but
can find that out.
he's not here. Hopefully he's listening. He can email me or something.
Okay. All right, anything else on that item? So we'll move to the next, item 2. Discussion regarding downtown public safety cameras.
Oh, it was 12:39. I was just looking to see why I didn't do it, because it was like the last.
Yeah, it was
year.
at New Year's.
I remember asking him if he was gonna do it or if he wanted me to.
Good evening, Vice Mayor Larson, Commissioners. I just want to take time to thank you for listening to what I believe is a very important subject. I want you to know that the issue of public cameras resurfaced in this community on October 1st of 2017. That's a date that I will always remember for 2 reasons. First, it was a day that a heinous, senseless, multi-victim shooting took place in downtown that claimed the lives of 3 people and injured 2 more. Second, it was the day before I was sworn in as Chief of Police in Lawrence, Kansas. Since the day of my arrival, I've made no bones about the fact that I'm a supporter of not only body cameras, but public cameras. From my research about this issue in the past, the discussion of public cameras have taken place in some form or fashion within this community since about 2003. I came here as chief with the goal to make Lawrence a safer place to live, work, learn, and play. So I can only provide you with my best professional insight and opinion based on almost 30 years of law enforcement. I can tell you up front that I respect everyone's opinion and know that with every point that I make for public cameras, there will be a counterpoint against them. And that's okay. I know as chief, sometimes you have to agree to disagree without being disagreeable. And I'm good with that. And I know that this issue will be one of those issues for some folks. Some of the comments that I will make are based on some actual experience that I have with working with public cameras. Because I think the parallels that I have from coming from my former jurisdiction and how we got the downtown cameras there and the tipping point that we reached there to sort of get there, and here are sort of similar. So I sort of wanted to share that sort of perspective with you. Around 2006, in my former jurisdiction of Louisville, Kentucky, there were some non-viewed public cameras that were put in place in hotspot and high vehicle traffic areas. They were the overt cameras that you knew were cameras. There was some signage with those cameras. Then, a while later, the cameras grew to about 54 cameras in number, but what we did was the cameras actually moved to a dispatch center where the radio calls were taken. And what that did was sort of, when the officers would make the emergency calls, it would give the dispatchers an opportunity to look at the camera. Say something happened downtown, then they could look at the camera and say, hey, I see this going on right now, this call we're sending you on, this car is fleeing, this person is fleeing. They could sort of pass on some live information to the officers. In those emergency situations. Other than that, they were not watching the cameras. The cameras were still recording, and they would be looked at later for any investigative information. Then in March of 2014, we had an incident where there were about 200 teenagers who met up at a park in downtown Louisville, and for whatever reason, they decided to roam downtown and cause chaos. And there were 17 reports of violent assaults and robberies that took place in a short amount of time. And that night was the tipping point to add cameras in downtown Louisville. Basically, I can tell you that our mayor said, I want those cameras up yesterday. Because the problem was we had so many incidents that happened, and we had a hard time identifying who all was involved. Because there were so many people involved, so many things that were going on, it was just hard to hold people accountable for their actions that night. My current chief at the time, he had already had on his plate to talk with the mayor about this concept of a real-time crime center, and it sort of sped that up. So that set into motion of adding 22 downtown cameras that would monitor that park and also other places of downtown, which brought up the number of total cameras to about 82, and also put into motion that concept of a real-time crime center. When I left Louisville to come here, there were roughly about 130 cameras that were installed throughout the city. This really is not a new type of technology that's been out there, and there are several things that you can do with this technology, from a real-time crime center to what you call a camera federation concept. The real-time crime center basically is when you have people monitoring screens, they're intelligence analysts. They basically give officers real-time information as they go into scenes. If you have things such as barricaded subjects, they can do intelligence scrubs to tell you the person barricaded in the house, this is who it is, this is the past record they have, so they give you this type of real-time information. The camera federations are pretty unique, and they were working on that aspect when I was leaving. That's sort of where you can businesses will allow you to tap into their business cameras, and it benefits both sides. For instance, if your business is being burglarized and you get hold up a burglar alarm, then it allows the police to see inside your business to see if someone is actually in there at that time, which is beneficial to you. I know that a friend of mine's the police chief in Detroit. They actually do something called Project Greenlight, where the businesses, it's a voluntary program. They have like the real-time crime center concept, but the Project Greenlight is where It's an upfront cost to the business, roughly, I think it's about $400 or so. With that, you get this green light to put outside your business, and you have to buy a certain kind of camera, and you get a sign. And basically, the ones that utilize that are like the 24-hour gas stations and stuff, because if they get robbed and they hit that hold-up alarm, then the police that monitoring can automatically see inside this business to see, are they getting robbed, who's robbing it, and get officers going there right away. So these are the types of things that you can do. But I just wanted to let you know those types of things. But what I'm asking for are none of those things. I'm asking for the lowest concept that you can do with cameras, which is a non-monitored use. I believe that Lawrence reached this tipping point on October 1st of 2017. Do I believe that we'll have a triple homicide downtown each year? Absolutely not. Do I believe that it could happen again? Yes, I do. And I believe that we can't wait until the next multiple homicide or heinous act of violence takes place to act. Cameras act as a force multiplier for law enforcement. They never get tired. They don't need a break. They don't call in sick. And they don't need to go home. They're always working as an extra set of eyes for law enforcement. With some of the data that I provided you ahead of time, I'll sort of hit on, just some of the reasons why I believe that cameras are effective. I do believe that cameras increase public safety. I believe when you put them through predetermined locations, that it can help to enhance public safety, protect property, and assist in crime prevention. I do believe that they deter crime and that they can change behavior. I believe that cameras change behavior, whether it's body cameras, whether it's public cameras. I believe that they have the ability to change behavior. I believe that the sight of the cameras sometimes keep people from doing things. But I will not sit here and tell you that they will keep everybody from doing everything. Because I am a true believer that if someone has bad intentions in their heart, they're going to do it. I believe cameras help catch criminals. When we have those cameras, our chances of catching somebody is much higher. It gives us the ability to make up wanted posters, share with the officers, share with other law enforcement agencies, and share with the media. It helps us get subscriptions of suspects, vehicles, things like that. Cameras assist us in gathering evidence and clues. They have the ability to capture crimes being committed. They can be used in the court of law as evidence. And may keep somebody who may go free from going free, who's committed a crime. But obviously they're only a piece of what we'd have to do in order to get a conviction. And obviously I can't get into a bunch of detail, but obviously I'll touch on the topic because the district attorney already has, but I'll tell you, if we didn't have the ability to piece things together with cameras on Mass Street, I can't tell you that we would have been able to bring 3 subjects to face justice. And coming from where I came from and being in charge of the units that I was in charge of, which was all of the detectives, I can tell you that, you know, I was impressed by the hard work that the men and women of this police department did to bring that to a resolution, and you don't always get that. Because I don't know how many hard conversations that I had to have with parents and grandparents where they're yelling at me for 20 or 30 minutes, telling me you're not doing your job, you don't know what you're doing, you can't solve this crime, when it's not really that. A lot of times, we know who did it. But knowing it and proving it is two different things. And obviously, you never want to incarcerate somebody just because you know who did it. You need to be able to prove it. Because when you do that, you run the possibility of re-victimizing the family a second time. And you never want to do that. You know, and I believe public cameras assist with arriving at the right decision. You know, whether somebody having a domestic on a street corner, or whether it's somebody that owns a store that has to put somebody out, and an altercation takes place outside. Sometimes there's, you know, there's at least 2 sides to every story. Sometimes there's 3, 4, and 5 sides to every story. And I think that it definitely can help with that when those things happen out in the public. That type of assistance can be obtained. You know, regardless of what happens at the end of the day with this, I want you and the public to know that we're going to continue to do our job to the best of our ability. And thank you for taking your time to listen, and I'll now take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Chief. Questions?
The cameras you're requesting, are these video only, or will they have audio capability?
To my understanding, they'll be video only, but let me look over here to my tech guy. Yeah, video only.
Okay. And these are overt cameras with necessary signage posted?
These are overt cameras. Yes, signage can and will be posted if that's the way we decide to go. You will be able to tether the cameras, and I have no problem with posting signage. And then, you know, really at the end of the day, I mean, you know, signage helps sometimes with anything that you do, whether it's cameras or whether it's, you know, you can't bring weapons in here, you know, or things like that. So I never think that posting signage can hurt.
I noticed in the policy that was written that it seems to be light on explanation as to what an individual can, you know, who can receive the videos, because it talks about anybody who would like to see the video, they would have to request for specific needs only, but you don't really identify what those specific needs are.
Which section?
It's number 4, accessible.
Oh yeah. Requesting video images? Oh, no, that's...
Yeah, video feeds or images from the cameras may be accessed or reviewed by individuals outside of the LPD only for specific needs, if requested. So is...
Yeah, that's sort of where it would be like if it was an outside agency, such as, you know, and I'll just use an example, such as the FBI contacts me and says, hey, we believe we've had a serial fill in the blank that's been in you all's community that was downtown at this time. And I would either allow or deny access to view the video for the time that they're telling me that they believe that this person may have visited or not visited our community. And those types of things do happen. So I felt it was important to put that in there and give me that type of leeway. And, you know, since I've been here, I've been contacted with that type of information. So obviously without going into detail.
So it would be the police department that would decide what qualifies as specific needs? Is that what you're...
Yeah, yes, ma'am. They would have to explain to me why they need access. And then obviously it would be up to me, or obviously if I'm not available or I'm gone or whatever, it would be up to whoever that I left in charge to make that determination whether it's a legitimate need.
Okay. Any questions?
So then to what extent does Cora apply to this? So would someone be able to make a Cora request for any of the video images?
Yes, ma'am. I sort of hit on that where it says requests made by the news media, and it speaks to the specific Kansas law.
But anyone can make a Cora request, right? So outside of the media, how would that apply?
I'll have to let the council speak on that.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Maria Garcia, Assistant City Attorney. Any member of the public would be able to make an open records request for those videos, but whether they're released to that member of the public is going to be made on a case-by-case basis. The video might capture some criminal activity, in which case we might classify that as a criminal investigative record that goes with the criminal case. But if it doesn't capture criminal activity, then it might be released. So there's not really a bright line rule on what we would let out on an open records request. We just have to look at it on a case by case.
So I got to read Cora today. That was exciting. And so I pulled a few things because the policy seemed to be lacking coverage, I guess, in the field in which I've worked, which is in stalking and sexual and domestic violence. So ensuring that, like, I understand if it's a crime, they're not going to release that information. But when someone is using that information for the purpose of stalking another individual and wanting to see, like, well, they said they were going to dinner at 6 with this person, and I acknowledge that is the great bare minimum, not likely to happen or not likely to happen often. However, having those protections in place under Cora, they could not allow dissemination of footage if it would, information that would reveal the location of a shelter, a safe house, or similar place, etc., or the name, address, location, or other contact information of alleged victims of stalking, domestic violence, or sexual assault. And then there's a legislative review and exceptions, and it again address like the safety issue. And so I'm wondering if there's a way in the policy to address, because it does say alleged victims, so it doesn't have to be, you know, a conviction or anything like that, but a way to protect individuals who might have a protection order against them from that person requesting that information specifically in the policy, or other kind of protections for usage of that footage in instances such as that.
I think we could certainly add that in there. I'm aware that the subsection that you read is part of the exception A10, which is the criminal investigation records. So those are reasons that a court could not even really order an open record to be released to somebody. So we would keep that in mind when reviewing it, but certainly we could build that into the policy if that's the commission's desire.
And excuse my incredibly vague understanding of Cora.
Oh, no,
it's not
okay.
my field.
There are many more exceptions to Cora besides A10, which is criminal investigation records. There's a catch-all one under A30, which talks about an invasion of privacy. It's very, very broad, but a lot of things could fall under that one as well. And then I think there are over 50 exceptions.
Yeah, the number, the shelter
consider.
safe house one was 47.
Okay, so that one is, so that's mentioned also in 10, so it's in more than one place in Cora. You're right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that should be added.
Can you speak a little bit about just the privacy issue? I know I received questions about that, the invasion of privacy. I know you went over it also in your memo about
I'd be
it.
happy
If
to.
you could talk about that a
So
little
the
bit.
Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. And so when we look at whether cameras are conducting an unreasonable search on somebody, we look at the person's expectation of privacy. And generally, you have an expectation of privacy in places that society recognizes that you should have them. So the highest expectation of privacy is inside your house. Society is very willing to say police shouldn't be looking inside your house without a search warrant or some recognized exception. But there is a lot of case law that has established that when you're out in a public place and visible just to anybody on the street, you do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy, and so the Fourth Amendment does not attach. So if you have a camera that's capturing somebody walking around on Mass Street, talking to somebody, walking with somebody else, that they cannot say that they're protected by the Fourth Amendment. Because what is visible to the naked eye to anybody on the street can also be captured by police, and there's no privacy issue under the Fourth Amendment. Contrast that if the camera were pointing into somebody's house. For example, if it were zoomed in, which the policy would cover, that's a prohibited act, but if it's used for the purpose of looking inside someone's house or inside a protected area where there is a reasonable expectation of privacy, then that is not allowed.
I would think the direction of the cameras is probably very important downtown, given that it is a residential area. Presumably, we cannot have cameras pointed at residential homes, even if it cannot see into the home. Is that a safe assumption, or is that not true?
Well, I think just for appearance-wise, it probably shouldn't be pointed at the house. If it can't see into it, then it's not a search, because the camera can't capture anything anyway. Okay. So there's no Fourth Amendment violation, but probably shouldn't be pointing it at someone's house, unless there's a recognized exception or some law enforcement need that a court has signed off on.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I got some questions. So when I have a few questions. So if the chief of police or his or her designee are the only ones that can approve, I was surprised that the city manager wasn't included in that as allowing someone to see something. What if the I don't know what. I can't go on a what if tangent, but it seems like that's very small number of people that can give approval.
That was the intent of this, because I wanted people to know that I'm taking it seriously. I'm taking privacy seriously, and that was the intent of that small thing. And obviously, the intent was not to leave out my boss, but I don't think that he's going to be saying, that. And obviously, if he wanted me to get something pulled for him for legitimate reason, obviously I would do that. But from the policies I've looked at on police department, the city manager is not written in any policies. It's the chief of police, because he is the CEO of the police department.
It just seems like it didn't have any kind of checks and balances. I don't know what that would be, though.
There's a lot of information that I'm not privy to, nor should I be privy to in the case of an investigation, in my opinion. And that does not mean I don't still retain authority over the department under the ordinances and statutes of the state. But I don't have, just so you know, I don't have a concern about that kind of language, because my view is that is the responsibility of the police department to handle those issues. Now, having said that, I also know that, at least in my mind, from a historical perspective, that Ferguson changed a lot about how I view my relationship with the police department. If I don't know what's going on in that department, I'm still accountable for and responsibility for things that happen in the department. It's under my direction, even going beyond just the appointment of the chief. So I guess I'd want to have a little bit more legal conversation with the city attorney about that particular provision, because in my mind, Ferguson changed a lot. I think managers, in many respects, had a view towards delegation and holding their department heads accountable for the operations. But you can't delegate your ultimate authority away. And so I still have the authority and the responsibility. And sometimes I think we think that just by passing delegation that absolves to some degree your responsibility. It doesn't, in my opinion, so.
Well, I'm satisfied if you guys are gonna discuss it.
Yeah.
And
And
see
really,
what's
this is
typical and-
the policy, before you get too deep into the policy, quite frankly, the policy would all have to come back for the due process part of this. This is a first kind of attempt at the draft of a policy. The department and I fully expect a very public vetting of this policy, a plus minus, pro-con kind of conversation about different provisions in this policy. So tonight it's to give you kind of a general overview of this, and we don't mind hearing, any specific concerns you have about it so that we can think about those things more before we bring it out for full viewing for a public process. But this is a first time to try and gauge where everybody's at with this.
did you have something on that?
I was gonna ask another question, but keep going.
Okay, I was curious, so when I was looking at the map, you have the green and the blue dots, and, trying to go back to it.
Can I follow up one thing real quick?
Sure.
I just want to reiterate what the city manager said. This is a draft, that's why it's a draft across the top of it. That this is, like I said, the first stab at this thing. And so, yeah, I'm sure we may make numerous changes in it if need be. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that, and know that, I think that Tom, has a certain amount of trust in me, and know that I would never put him in a trick bag and keep him uninformed about anything that he should not know about. So just to let y'all know about that. But.
I'm trying to find the map, and for some reason I can't seem to dig
It's
it up.
under memo on downtown violent crime.
Oh, it's
If you go to the main agenda.
Got
or-
it.
Here, you wanna look at mine?
No,
You got it?
I had it up a little while ago, so I'm a little frustrated. But my point was that the green ones were at the intersections, and the blue ones, of course, were more mid-block and also at the corners. But the blue ones, I think those were the ones that were gonna be the pan-tilt zoom cameras. Am I
Yes, ma'am.
understanding that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then the green ones were
Stationary.
labeled non-movable, so they're like 360 kind of cameras. So, what I'm getting at is that I start to have really big concerns when I think that they're gonna be monitored. If I think they're just kind of passive cameras, I'm not as concerned, but if something is a pan-tilt zoom camera, that makes me think that there might be an operator behind it. Am I barking up the right tree in thinking that?
Well, there may be a time when there is an operator.
Yeah.
I put in the policy that during special events, that the cameras could possibly be monitored. Elite Eight, Final Four, St. Patrick's Day, I think those are legitimate times where I would have a potential security concern about something that could take place downtown, and the cameras could potentially be monitored.
I guess want to make sure that there's strong language in what is designating that those cameras are being monitored real time.
There will be no real-time monitoring of the cameras. I thought I put that in there.
You might have.
Unless exigent circumstances exist.
Yeah, the exigent circumstances that exist. And when I put that, what's meant by that is if we have if we have a subject that decides to barricade themselves in a business or something like that, to me, that's an exigent circumstance where we may have to actually monitor a camera, or they take hostages in a store. That's an exigent circumstances where we may get on the camera and monitor it. Those are exigent circumstances to me.
Well, if we add the section that you were talking about having to do with stalking and such, I mean, that might make me feel a little better about it. But that's when I start to get a little
But that's not
nervous.
really, that's
But
what
I
you
put
were
in
talking
there,
about was a request for
Correct.
video, not the actual recording of video.
Yeah, no, I put in there, the cameras will not be monitored live by any LPD personnel as a matter of daily police operations, with the exceptions of specific large-scale special events. And then I sort of named some of those events.
But perhaps a more specific understanding of what exigent circumstances may.
I guess so. I
Yeah,
guess I'm
I can
relying
put that
on
in
you
there.
to interpret what I'm thinking.
I think that kind of
Yeah,
runs through the
I can
whole,
add hostage situation, barricaded subject, I can put some more language in there.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that just kind of runs through the whole policy, written policy, is it's so limited on specific definitions as to what those circumstances are, what the special needs are, and I realize there's trust between our current city manager and the chief, but what happens to in the future, and I really worry about that we don't, this does not seem to be a really solid policy that's going to be protective of privacy and handling of the video. I mean, so I'm very concerned about that.
Well, I tried to address the handling by limiting who could access the video, which was a big deal, saying only certain people, which would be a single-digit number, even could access the video. And by going through the procedures that any officer would have to take to even request the video, saying that they had to get permission from their supervisor to say that it's okay to get this video, and then making a single clearinghouse that would be in charge of getting this video. You know, like I said, I have no problem with any updates or whatever that we need to do to the policy, but like I said, I could have sent it without, but I felt that it was important to send something to let you know that I was taking it seriously, knowing that people would have concerns, taking concern seriously, because I mean, I can tell you from some of the research that I've done, there's some departments that don't even have a policy on cameras. So again, I mean, it was a first stab at something that I thought was important, particularly listening to prohibited uses and making sure that I put in there that, you know, you know, reasonable expectation of privacy, and talking about that they're going to be focused in public areas. So I tried to capture at least the stuff on first blush that I thought would be very, very important.
Okay.
I did have one other question.
Okay.
So we did have someone send us an email. She didn't think that we would have public comment tonight, so
Yes.
It's good to see that she'll be able to have it in the future. But she was worried also about federal cooperation. What was the phrase that she used? Perhaps she gave the example of sanctuary cities and cooperation with the federal government. You know, she's an attorney, so she has a better handle of what she's talking about, but it had to do with federal cooperation, though.
I mean, this also goes to, can these be subpoenaed? I mean, what control do we have over this video? Even though we talk about it only being reviewed by the technical investigations, what control do we have over the video if we can be subpoenaed or whatever?
Yeah. I guess
Well,
I'll
I
just
think
rely on her speaking about it in another.
Yeah, because I would need to
comment
know
setting.
exactly what she means as far as federal, because I can tell you, you know, we deal with the FBI, DEA, and all that on a daily basis. So yes, I deal with the federal government, and if one of them had a valid explanation for wanting to or needing to see video, I'm going to take that into acknowledgement. Like I said, since I've been here, without getting into details, because I can't, the FBI has contacted me and said, we believe such and such has been in Lawrence, Kansas. I think that's a big deal. And if I get that information and it's valid information, I can't just turn a blind eye on it.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely, that email was very long, so I'm not even going to try to read it. But
We'll
I'll
just forward
definitely
it.
send that to you and Maria and the city manager, so you can
Yeah, now if it's just looking at people
better
to,
understand
you
what
know,
she was trying to say with that. And then my last thing wasn't a question so much as a comment, in that you were talking about the programs that perhaps partner with businesses so you can tap into theirs. Would we have to have a separate policy if we wanted to allow people to do that, or are they allowed to do that now? Because
No.
I don't really have any issue with that.
No, that would be, if you sort of do that, that would be more of, when people do that when they actually monitor the cameras, because the value of that is that someone's actually watching it. So you're actually helping the business if somebody breaks in, or if we get a hold up. I'm actually watching that happen live, or I have the ability to switch into that camera if we get a notification that it's a holdup alarm, I can actually see that at the police department and go, oh yeah, there's a guy in there in a ski mask and he's right there right now. Y'all need to get there. So that's the value of when they do the camera federations and
So
stuff.
you can do that now?
No.
Oh, you can't do that now?
No, we cannot.
So I guess that's what I'm asking. So if a business wanted to do that somehow, would we need to add a section to this policy?
We'd have to have monitoring.
To allow that?
In order, in my opinion, to be effective, you'd have to have the monitoring component, but obviously, obviously I'd have to do some more research on it and talk to my technical people to see if it's a way to allow that tapping into the cameras just for footage purposes only. But because like I said, the ones I'm used to is basically for the live monitoring component of it.
I was going to suggest that maybe you could discuss it with Downtown Lawrence DLI and see if that's something they're interested in. And I mean, it's a whole nother tangent, obviously, but you know, if they're looking to do something like that, you know, I'm okay with that if they want to do that.
But if we go down that route, now you've got live monitoring.
That's live monitoring.
And so that's a whole
Yeah.
different level of lack of privacy. And I'm not as comfortable with that. I mean,
I guess that's why I'm asking if we need to add something to this policy, or would that be a separate policy?
Well, I think that'd be a whole separate conversation, because obviously I believe, because we've had the conversation, I believe that non-monitoring was the first step to take, and then obviously you've got exponential things you can do from there, if that was the way that we decided to go as a community from there. But I believe first things first. Try to do this. If we think it's doing good, then we can sort of expand our ways out. But like I said, I can always sort of try and do some research and check and see if businesses are doing the non-live monitoring or not.
Yeah, I'm
I can
okay
just
with
make a
that being,
couple.
you know, a future thing that you look into.
Okay. That's it.
You know, the idea out there is that cameras will potentially deter crime, or crime will decrease. Is there any data that shows that it actually?
Well, I think that's sort of a debatable thing. My thing on there is I believe that the deterrence factor is sort of, if somebody looks up and sees a camera and I was maybe going to grab some guy's wallet, I may not do it since I know it's a camera up and I looked up. But also the crime deterrent factor with me was sort of evident during the basketball tournament, when we were able to say, hey, we've got this crowd over here. There's a couple of guys in it that are getting a little antsy and pushing each other, move 12 officers over there. And then once we shifted the officers, people sort of calmed down a little bit. So to me, that itself was a crime deterrent, because we were able to see it, we was able to shift it. So the, you know, and it's going to be a debatable whether it deters crime. But for me, one of the biggest thing is getting the evidence. If something was to happen, to me that's invaluable. Because I can tell you personally from my experience, I've seen murders happen on camera. I've seen carjackings happen on camera. I've seen cars get stolen on camera. You know, I've had, you know, pastors call me and say, hey, somebody broke into my church member's car. Do y'all have a camera there? And I was able to say, yeah, I believe we do. Let me see if we can find anything. And was able to have my people look on it, see the guy, you know, see the kid riding up and down the street on the bike, and then see him jump off the bike, break the window, and steal the stuff out of the car. So there are successful things that can happen from things that are captured on camera that I've seen myself. You know, I've seen stabbings on camera. I mean, things do get captured on camera. Like I said, some people just, like I said, if bad people want to do bad things, they're going to do them whether you tell them the camera's there or not.
So to get back to my question, is there any data out there that shows that these will cause crime to drop?
Well, I don't know about data. I think you have to measure that in your own community.
Okay.
I really do. I think we'd have to put them up and then see what happens in our crime in our downtown area, whether it has any effect on it or not. And I don't know how you can really tell whether you know, somebody decides that they're not going to do anything or not, besides saying whether we had a crime decreasing within our own community. That, to me, is the best way to measure it.
What percentage of crimes downtown are unsolved?
I'm sorry.
What percentage of crimes that occur downtown are unsolved at this point?
I don't have that information in front of me. I can get that to you. But
Is there a concern that if you put cameras in this range of area you have on the map, that it will move crime off that area into neighborhoods?
Well,
I've heard that concern from some citizens.
I think that whenever you do anything, whether it's cameras or whether you say we're going to put more officers here or we're going to do more directed patrol here, crime can always be displaced. And my hope is that we displace it out of Lawrence, Kansas, regardless of what the initiative is to do. And that is, you know, and to me that's always the hope, is to move the crime. And in my experience, yeah, you always shift it around. Either you shift it around to a different area, or hopefully you shift it out of your city. You know, I think most places that I've been, and especially when you're making downtown a focal point that you want people to come to, you know, I think that you have to do things to sort of assure people that we take safety seriously, and I think this is a step in the right direction to do that. Now, whether, you know, again, whether it's done or not, we're going to continue to do our job. But as your police chief, I can only give you my best information and direction on which way I believe, as far as safety, that we should move.
Thank you. Anything else for the chief? Matthew? Nope. Okay. Well, I think we'll open it up to public comment now.
Thank you.
Thank you, chief.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. My name is Kirsten Kuhn. I live over on West 25th. I do apologize for the redundancy. You guys have received an email with what I'm about to say, but we did want it entered for public records. So I am here on behalf of the Douglas County Libertarians. We are opposed to the permanent installation of security cameras along Massachusetts. Whether these cameras are monitored in real time or only referenced after a crime has been committed is irrelevant. There are serious privacy, logistical, and financial concerns which must trump a reactionary response to a terrible event. Although we acknowledge a reduced right to privacy in public space, the installation of additional cameras pushes these boundaries without any measurable benefit. Local businesses already monitor their grounds and provide this footage to law enforcement upon request. Several city cameras monitor the area as well. Additional cameras do not and will not prevent crime. At best, they may help solve some after the fact, but the numbers for violent crime that the public was provided with only list the most 3 recent years. Well, we all agree that this triple homicide was really, really terrible. It seems like this was an isolated occurrence. Aside from that, it appears the last murder en masse was in 2006. So that begs the question of violent crime over the long term. We also suspect that the expected potential deterrent effect of the cameras is not necessarily applicable to this area. A large amount of downtown businesses serve alcohol and operate late into the night, especially in the case of aggravated assault or something like along those lines. Someone may commit a crime regardless of the cameras if they're so drunk that they're not thinking about the consequences of their actions. The alcohol may also explain the apparent recent rise in crime, but we just don't know about any of these things. So even a perfectly drafted policy is still vulnerable to abuse, and it just takes one bad actor to have access to a multitude of information. Of course, not saying anything about the chief, who's apparently the only guy, but although this is, the individual appearances may be something that's publicly observable, the ability to track someone from place to place would be called stalking if you were doing it in person. We have concerns about what kind of monitoring can be done to understand if this data has been accessed improperly, whether internally or externally, and what the outcomes would be if this were to occur. The ACLU has found these sorts of systems are quite susceptible to fraud and misuse. According to them, quote, once installed, surveillance systems rarely remain confined to their original purpose, have little impact on public safety, and have a chilling effect on public life. Furthermore, the claims that this would simply push crime outside the monitored areas, that is a concern. This could mean more dispersed crime, but not necessarily a decrease. The city itself did look at Vermont and New Hampshire, so we don't know how far out that would move. This is a slippery slope, and it might lead to a call to add more cameras. City's already proposing $108,000, so how much would this end up costing in the end if we're looking at ever expanding this? Should these costs be shouldered by the downtown businesses? And if not, why should the other areas of town pay for mass to receive special treatment? While we understand the commission and the community's concern for safety in Lawrence, and we share that, we don't believe that this particular measure is the best use of our time and resources. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Hello, I'm Sally Zagra. I'm the Executive Director of Downtown Lawrence, Inc., which is our downtown business association. I really did not come here planning to make any comment. And I always email myself notes because I don't know how to text myself notes. So I have been taking notes. I'll just say a couple of observations thus far. Actually, let me get my notes. That we have, as a group, not had, either as a board or as a membership, had a substantive conversation about downtown security cameras. Given that this is just in the work session stage, I did notify everyone via our member emails and an email to my board that I would be attending tonight just to listen. I like to do a lot of listening, although I can do a lot of talking too. And so I'm not saying that we have a position. A couple of things. I don't think that most downtown business owners would be against the cameras for the very reasons, some of the reasons that the chief stated. And we do look at the triple homicide as an anomaly. I firmly believe it's an anomaly, and I hope we don't see another instance like that for another ever. But there are other types of behaviors that go on downtown, and I know, Matt, we've talked about this. We talked about this at the Candidates Forum back in the fall. Jennifer was there and Lisa was there, and Matt kind of took some heat for it. There are other behaviors, including shoplifting. And not one person, except for the chief, has mentioned shoplifting, and shoplifting happens all the time downtown. And this is a major problem for business owners. And once that shoplifter leaves your business, you are limited as to what you can do. And very few business owners will follow a shoplifter out onto the sidewalk, chase them down, or even have necessarily a good enough description. While the assumption is that downtown businesses are monitoring this on their own, the majority of businesses don't have cameras. We have a downtown where there are a lot of businesses that don't have a POS system. There are people who don't even have a cash register, and they certainly don't have a security camera. And that can be an expense. Now, costs have come down, and there certainly are some wonderful business owners who have great footage, and they have the most high tech, and they do work with the police on a regular basis, and they catch things like bicycle theft and. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Sally. Just finish up here.
Oh, sorry. I didn't even look at the clock. See, I talk too much. Anyway, so that is one instance when we talk about wanting people to feel that they're safe downtown. You've all heard me talk about the panhandlers, people who don't live downtown all day long. That is a big issue, and if it is possible to deter, then we want to do that.
Thank you, Sally.
Sorry I went over.
That's okay. Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Okay. Well, we'll bring it back up here. Anything else you want to add to this?
Well, I didn't have a lot of concern until Leslie, till some of your comments, and I guess I want to voice my response more to your comments, is that I want to be very careful that we don't pursue what the chief referred to as a green light, Operation Green Light. Is that what you called it? Where's he at? There's it. Was it Operation Greenlight where you can tap into the store camera with live monitoring? Or?
No, Operation Greenlight is what the...
Chief, could you come on up, please, and speak into the...
Sorry.
That's okay.
No, the Operation Greenlight is actually where the business has to buy
Oh, okay.
camera.
Well,
Yeah.
either way, my
Yeah.
point is that the systems you had talked about require a live monitoring station. And that is not something I have a lot of interest in. That I don't deny some of the claim that this may not stop crime, but I think there's an immense amount of value in it from an evidence collection standpoint. You know, when the triple homicide occurred downtown, one of the first outcries of the community was, you need to have more policing downtown. Well, the triple homicide occurred 100 yards away from literally the police station, and we had police officers so close that they began a foot pursuit, as I recall. I mean, that's how close we had police officers to that situation. More police downtown doesn't stop that triple homicide. And so when I look at the benefit of cameras, I don't actually look at it from a crime deterrence standpoint, because I agree with your comments that in a downtown atmosphere, a lot of this crime is happening from individuals who have been drinking, and a lot of the aggravated assaults are not going to be done by people in a clear enough mindset to say, there's a camera there, I should consider throwing a punch at a different location. I think that in the heat of the moment, the crime's going to occur with or without the camera. What I see the benefit of is a reactive policy of being able to go back and collect evidence. And like you said, we may know who did it, but proving it is an entirely different animal. And in the case of our triple homicide, I think luckily we were able to have video footage, even though we had cops close enough to have a foot pursuit, and it happened within eyesight of a police station without private video footage, we may not have brought justice. And so I say all that because all of that can be done without any form of live monitoring whatsoever. And that would be my preference for how this policy is adopted. I don't have an interest in having individuals sitting in a live crime station, whatever you wanted to call it, monitoring this. So.
Yeah, my comments had to do where I was nervous about public space monitoring. When I was talking about the private space monitoring, if that's something that businesses want inside of their business, that I was just curious, I guess, procedural wise, if that's something we need to talk about now, but it's apparently something that would be talked about in the future anyways, and not with what we're doing now. So, yeah, when it comes to monitoring public spaces, I get nervous about real time, as I was asking you for a better definition. But in the future, maybe when we talk about private business, what they might want to achieve, it's very much in the future, so.
I
We don't have to talk about
just
it
wanted
now.
to clear that, make sure
Yeah.
we're on the same page there.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Anything, Jennifer?
Well, I think that this is a difficult issue, and it should be for us, because we have to balance freedom and privacy with security and safety. And it rings back to me to conversations that I had and overheard on 9/11 and around the issue of 9/11 and air support security and safety involved in that, and being in a public space but being very privately considered. And obviously this is nowhere near the level of that, but to me that's where it comes from, and I'm a huge advocate for privacy. I put stickers on my cameras on my laptop, but I'm an incredibly boring person. It's not because I'm doing things that I don't want anybody to see. I also acknowledge that being in the public is being in the public, and there is a lowered expectation of privacy along with that. And if I were downtown and experienced a crime, for example, drugging and rape, first of all, we know that generally people take more than 14 days to report that, so according to this policy, that footage would be gone at that point. But if my purse is stolen or my bag is stolen, I'm probably going to report that pretty quickly, and if I'm intoxicated, identifying that person might be difficult. So I just think that there's a lot, for me personally, to balance here as we're talking about this. and that it takes all of this conversation, having had a business downtown. There were times when I wanted to call law enforcement because I was sick of hearing the same 5 songs on rotation from the Troubadour below my window. And so I do have, concerns about, what kind of reported crimes would be looked at. Is it just that person is annoying out here? Can we find a crime that they've committed by reviewing this footage? Versus a crime I believe has been committed, and I, want to move forward with an investigation on that. So I would be very, very closely monitoring what that policy looks like and what the exceptions are to that policy and how we move forward on it. I guess that's all I have on it, but it feels like a big thing for me anyway, and considering all of this.
I think it is a big step for all of us. I walk into this with a lot of hesitation as to the possible unintended consequences that can occur, but I also see the value for helping with solving crime. So when I read the policy, I just thought it was real light, and that's kind of where I would go. Is I would need a lot more detail in order to move forward. So, anything else? Nope. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to take a quick break. Give us about 5 minutes or so.
Okay. but I don't think she's on.
Where's she at? Is she out there?
Yeah. My fault, guys.
Okay, we'll go to item number 3 on our work session agenda, which is the proposed merger of Public Works and Utility Departments. Oh, you want to go ahead and do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You want to set that up?
Yeah, Tom's going to bring up an item regarding some work that's getting ready to start up at KU on their new facility.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The University of Kansas is completing design work on their new practice football facility just west of Memorial Stadium. And KU, city staff, and neighborhood representatives have been meeting pursuant to the City KU Cooperative Land Use Agreement to discuss the project. Truck traffic through neighborhoods has been the primary concern since over 100,000 cubic yards of earth will be removed and trucked away from the facility. This project is set to get underway in mid-April. On April 17th, KU will be in front of the City Commission to present a summary of the project and the committee's work, along with the traffic control plan and how affected owners and tenants most affected by the trucks will be notified of the project schedule and impacts. The reason I bring this up is because the actual work could start a day or two before the 17th. And so I'm trying to get a bit of transparency out there, and hopefully the press picks this up and covers that story as well, so that residents that may see some truck traffic all of a sudden that they weren't experiencing or expecting before this, know that this is tied into what will be presented on the 17th. So that's why I bring it up, okay?
It's a lot of dirt.
Yeah. And I don't know, and you know, if it may just be a day or two, but we just thought it was best to give you that heads up, so. Okay, so the agenda item that we're going to address, and let me just say that you have 3 work session items that were pretty significant items in terms of conversation and where the community goes in the future and how it impacts the lives of everyone in this community, whether residing here or visiting here. So this proposal as well is one of those. It's called the MSO proposal, which stands for the Municipal Services and Operations Department. And what we're talking about is a new department that combines the current Public Works and Utilities departments. All resources, management, administration, operations, support positions, equipment, and facilities would now be under one department head and operation. And when you think about a project like this from a city manager's standpoint, this is one of those projects that we like to undertake because it really has an impact, potential impact on the community in a very positive way, in my opinion, for a very long time in the operation of this community. So this is one of the more exciting things that managers get to do in terms of projects. It's like the strategic planning effort that we undertook, or the capital improvements programming that we put in place, or maybe a new technology that we get to develop or implement here in the community. The other thing I want to talk about to kind of get a picture in your mind is that we're talking about a lot of work in these departments that occurs in the public right-of-way. And if you think about it, and this is general, it's not always the case, but in general, Public Works works on those improvements, you know, surface and above the public right-of-way. Utilities works on those things below the surface in the public right-of-way. And this is a proposal that gets everybody looking at above and below grade right-of-way improvements and maintenance with the total view of the right-of-way and what happens within that right-of-way. So we think that that's a better way to approach public works and utilities going forward. So in terms of the development of the MSO concept, in the fall of 17, more than 47 of our employees in public works and utilities and other departments, because there's potential for this kind of nucleus to grow at some point, participated in 7 stakeholder groups formed around similar functions, and those functions are listed on the PowerPoint. Additionally, last week we held 5 informational meetings with the employees in the Public Works and Utilities Department. I think at one we had 150 or more employees show up at least in one of them. So we got this word out, and we tried to do this in advance of this meeting to make sure our employees knew, what we were talking about, what it involved, and give them a chance to ask us questions and engage with us about this proposal. A lot of the people that are left in the room tonight are public works and utilities employees, and they're free to comment at the end of this too about this proposal, many of which I think participated as one of those 47 employees in the discussions. As the merger process takes shape, employees will be engaged in many concurrent efforts, as we will discuss later in this presentation. Alignment with the strategic plan. The City Commission's strategic plan provides a practical framework for how we manage through change. It informs how we approach service delivery on a daily basis, and it also guides decisions about the long-term sustainability. The strategic plan defines our mission, vision, and organizational values. It also defines 7 critical success factors which we use to guide policy decisions as well as decisions about service delivery. We'll discuss in the next several minutes the MSO, how the MSO aligns with our strategic plan. We've shown a slide here for the public's benefit, necessarily more than the commission's, because you're familiar with our vision and our mission. Also in the strategic plan, we listed our organizational values: character, competence, courage, collaboration, and commitment. And as I mentioned, we have critical success factors. And we looked at the critical success factors and how they would be involved in terms of this merger proposal. And in terms of the MSO, we think it is founded on best practices and will require bold leadership and professionalism from all of our employees. Efficiency gains will enable service level enhancements that move the community forward. Another of the critical success factors that we thought was very relevant was the innovative infrastructure and asset management. And Public Works and Utilities represents over 40% of the organization's employees and resources, 40% when you combine them. The departments build, maintain, and support the vast majority of the above and below ground infrastructure that makes this community work. We are already seeing new collaborations between the two departments. You'll recall the farmland incident and all the challenges that we faced with that just in the last 6+ months, year. And Matt Bond was kind of the stormwater engineer. Matt's actually been moved over to utilities because we really found a better synergy in working Matt through the utilities operation, where they're a little more science-based in terms of what they do, both in sanitary sewer and in water production and how they operate. So we found a better connection there in terms of how we do things. So those things we think will evolve as a part of this merger process as this continues. But examples of ongoing efforts include coordinated planning and project management through the capital improvements program, which I think has only been in effect here for a couple of years now. Investments in technology like the capital projects management system, Lucity, asset management system. On a day-to-day basis, the employees of Public Works and Utilities are communicating and cooperating more effectively than has occurred in the past. We're seeing collaborative partnerships form that are addressing critical needs within existing resource constraints. We have, in my opinion, we don't have the luxury of really operating, and I don't like to use the word silo, but I'll use it here, in silos. I think there's always been an effort to communicate back and forth, but there's been examples where we've missed that communication and not really been as effective as we might have been if there'd been collaboration on particular issues as we've dealt with them through the years between Public Works and Utilities. The MSO will provide a structure that further supports these types of efforts. Critical success factor 4, commitment to core services. You recall during the strategic plan we had a pretty serious conversation about core services. Obviously the city is a big tent kind of operation, meaning we have those core services, police, fire, public works, utilities, some would include parks and rec and those types of things. And then we have others that quite frankly are just as important to many people in the community, arts and culture, social services, and numerous other types of activities. Economic development is typically not considered a core service of a city. So that there's all those other things that are competing for dollars. But we really consider Public Works and utilities to be one of our main core services. Many of the services are considered core. Many are legally mandated. Most, if not all, are directly related to our core mission of public health, safety, and welfare. And strategic coordination of our core services through consolidation will better enable the city to adapt service levels to meet evolving community expectations. The other critical success factors are safe and healthy, welcoming neighborhoods, sound fiscal stewardship, collaborative solutions, and economic growth and security. We've highlighted the 3 that we think are directly on point, but we really feel that all of them have a relationship to this merger proposal. The change processes take commitment. They must be guided by sound strategy and planning, and they must also be tailored to the organization. Some organizations are likely to use consultants to evaluate this kind of situation and come up with recommendations. We haven't done that. We're approaching this very much from an organic kind of a process. We're involving our employees, and our hope is that our employees will engage with us to a level that they're really not used to in helping us shape this. We're not going to start the merger fully collaborative and understanding, but there's things that we'll do. We'll do some job sharing. We'll do some job shadowing between departments. We'll do some things that have not been done to show employees what's going on in different parts of the operation and how they fit in, and maybe actually show them some opportunities for their own professional and personal growth within the organizations that they don't necessarily see as clearly as they might with a combined department. In terms of extensive ongoing change, the city has evolved and changed throughout its entire history. The Public Works and Utilities departments have done the same, with significant changes having occurred in just the past several years. This is how we stay relevant and meet the community's continually evolving expectations. Change is driven by many factors: employee turnover, employee promotions, succession planning, technology, resource constraints, public policy, regulations, the economy. We don't think about some of the external things that affect our operations, but just think about the recent conversation from the federal level about tariffs and what kind of impact that would have on the city, let alone all of us individually and our families, about how that global economy that we're now involved in changes how we should be doing things or thinking about things. Best practices may be the past best practice. I would hope that we would be more on the leading, cutting edge and creating some best practices ourselves. And I think that this gives us a better opportunity to do those things. Building on our strengths. Strategic change through the MSO merger builds on the strengths and momentum of the Public Works and Utilities departments. These departments are characterized by a vast number of similarities and closely related functions. I view the merger as a natural next step in the long history of development of both departments. The implementation process. I want to reemphasize that the merger is an evolving process. The MSO will better enable us to work collaboratively towards common goals. I want to discuss at a high level how this effort will take shape. I also want to touch on the priorities that will guide the efforts. The big picture stuff is important. Just as important, though, is the ability of employees to work together and communicate effectively. I'm a proponent of innovation and improvement being driven by employees closest to the work and closest to the customers. And this process supports that philosophy. One of the conversations I had with the employees was, and in some, when you give these conversations 5 times, you try to stay fairly close to the script, but I have a tendency to get off script every so often. And one of the things I'd like to compare as I think a good analogy is our police department. If you think about the police operation and all the services that a city provides, it really has the ability to be the flattest of the organizations because individual police officers are constantly dealing with problems that they're kind of faced to resolve. And there's very little chance for verticality where they can just push these issues up the chain and let a supervisor or an administrator up the chain deal with. Most of the things that police officers deal with have to be dealt with fairly quickly. And so I like to see that kind of operation occur in public works and utilities where I would like to see our employees more engaged and give them the ability to make some of those decisions when they're dealing with the customer directly rather than having necessarily to check back. But that takes trust, and that takes trust in an employee and allowing the employee maybe to take some risks and not always, being in a harsh view when an employee doesn't necessarily maybe proffer the right or the best solution, but maybe that's the training opportunity. It's not a disciplinary opportunity. And maybe that's the way we have to change the way we look at that part of the operation. In terms of implementation priorities, these 3 priorities are simple but critical to the day-to-day and long-term success of the MSO. We're committed to these priorities. Service level enhancement, we cannot make decisions or take actions that will result in the erosion of our service levels. That's critical to this proposal, is to maintain, it's actually to enhance our service levels. Innovations and efficiency gains are expected. This is how we will accomplish service level enhancements within resource constraints. So by creating those efficiencies, my intention is not to have any layoffs that result from the merger itself, considering what we see going forward in terms of our economic future. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't have attrition. I talked about attrition the day I was interviewed here, and I still believe in attrition. In fact, I explained to employees that massive layoffs, I think in many respects, are a failure of management. To see what's coming down the road, to anticipate critical events. Now, there's some natural disasters that obviously I can't foresee, but a lot of the economics in our country we have to be paying attention to and reading, what's going on in the country to be able to anticipate economic downturns that may affect how we operate and what kind of revenue streams we have coming in. And so that takes a lot of responsibility on the management to do that. So my assurance to the employees is that this merger is not going to cause layoffs. My assurance is that as we gain efficiencies, we'd look at attrition, meaning that if an employee is at retirement, we take a hard look, which we're doing right now. We have a modified attrition program in effect. Any employee opening that occurs right now, it runs across my desk before it's filled, to see if there's any opportunity to make us, double up or redirect how that work is being done in a more efficient way. And quite frankly, I thought maybe I could attrit more than I have. In most cases, we refill. So I have to look at other ways to make us efficient in those terms. And you know, you all know, going through the budget discussions, how many challenges we have fiscally here. And so I think we have to look at how we operate as well as anything else. We can't always run to looking for additional revenue streams. We have to look at how we operate, and I think that's what drives a lot of this. Finally, retaining and improving on the city's position as an employer of choice is critical. Through this process, we'll discover new ways of delivering services. We'll identify new pathways for employees to grow in their careers with the city. Next steps. Slide reflects that the commission, employees, and public should expect in the coming weeks. Regarding the last point, forming teams around functions, this is how the merger process will take form. A number of concurrent efforts are needed to facilitate the merger of these two departments and their work groups. Management, employees, and subject matter experts will collaboratively guide the merger process, refine the objectives, and measure progress. Some of these efforts are highlighted in the following slides. Management systems. Our management systems are policies, processes, and procedures. A comprehensive review will be undertaken to identify opportunities for alignment and standardization between the two operations. The management systems need to support equity, collaboration, cross-training, and other needs of the MSO. Our financial strategies. The department is supported by multiple different funds. The Water Fund, the Sanitary Sewer Fund, the Storm Sewer Fund, Solid Waste, Motor Fuel Taxes, General Fund, Airport, all of these different funds. When you look at them in isolation, you tend to be fairly myopic in terms of how those funds can be spent. But when you perform collaborations, you can fund and share some of the funding between operations if they serve more than one function. And so we think that's a better way to utilize the resources that we have coming in. You recall, for example, we have a substantial reserve set aside for solid waste. And we moved the hazardous waste facilities up to a site that we had north of 80. And when I came here, I talked to the commission about the facilities we have for public works. And public works facilities are located in not just a floodplain. I'm told we're in a floodway. And I had occasion on Good Friday to walk the entire site and observe how close we were to that watershed in that creek, and was quite concerned about the environmental intrusion that we alone are producing on that watershed. And so I had seen that before, and one of the things I think we do need to do is move towards a more centralized campus kind of facility and location for our services in both public works and in utilities, but potentially for parks and rec maintenance as well. And when I talked about silos a little bit, just one of the little things that struck me as I walked through there, there's a part of that facility when you go down there that's completely fenced off from everything else. That's Parks and Rec. And it seems odd to me that you wouldn't have, you know, passageways or connected facilities, but that it's literally fenced off and isolated from everything else. And that's, to me, kind of, and I don't like I said, I don't like to use the word silo, but that is kind of a siloing kind of approach to things in the community. And I think we need to knock down some of those fences and have people working together to solve problems and deal with issues in the community. Human resources strategy is needed to ensure equity among employees, cross-training opportunities, identify gaps and additional needs, and begin succession planning. Technology strategy should support collaboration and data-driven decision-making and analysis and performance evaluation, continue with the ongoing efforts that support collaborative and innovative operations. Future technology investments will continue leveraging resources to meet shared needs. We haven't always bought technology solutions to meet shared needs. We've bought technology solutions on occasion to meet individual department needs. And that's not a good investment in my view. And we have some examples of that, but I think enough said. Facility strategy, I've kind of already addressed the facilities issue. Equipment strategy, I think we almost zeroed down our equipment replacement reserves in our finances, and hopefully with some fund balance redirection, we can start to build those up. Customer service strategies. Public Works and Utilities are very high contact when it comes to the public and their customers. Customer service is a top priority, but we must be smart, coordinated, and efficient in our customer service efforts. Meaning simple things like when somebody gets asked a question about utilities, we track it for them. You know, if we have a person on the street that's dealing with something, we don't just tell them to call a number. We try and facilitate that more than just asking somebody to call a number. We help them. Better customer service in that regard. Regulatory strategy. The operations of both the departments are subject to extensive regulation, KDHE and the EPA, and developing coordinated and even consolidated regulatory strategies will improve the city's regulatory compliance while also improving efficiency and enhancing service delivery to the community. I think that was a big part in Matt Bond moving over, stormwater engineer, to utilities, was some of that ongoing relationship that the utilities department had just because of the work they kind of do more so than Public Works. It just made a lot more sense to have that connection through utilities because there was already relationships there. And so this will enhance that. And finally, any questions? Brandon has been working at my side through this, along with the various departments, management and supervision, and in some cases employees directly. So we would be happy to answer any questions. You have a number, like I said, of Public Works and Utilities employees in the office or in the room tonight, and if they if you want to engage them in the process, I certainly encourage you to get their views on what they think. I think this is it's a good move for us, and I think, like I said, it isn't all going to happen right away. There are a number of ordinances that we need to consider. I described it to some extent that some of these ordinance changes are like if you change the street name in front of your house, you'd have all sorts of things that you needed to update, right? Your driver's license and, you know, your mailing addresses and all that stuff that's related to that. Some of the ordinance changes are kind of like that. Some of them, I would say, are more regulatory. Some, like I said, are somewhat ministerial. So we have, I think, 30-some ordinances that would have to be considered by the city to effectuate this merger. We'd have to go through a selection process to hire a consolidated administration of this department. We will really build this out, though, through the budget process coming up and get into more of the, you know, where the costs are. We'll show you what it was between the two departments, and we'll show you what a consolidated looks like in terms of the budget impact. Be glad to answer any questions at this point.
Questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask about, and just out of curiosity, you were talking about HR strategies for evaluations regarding equity. What is that about?
Well, I think there's issues in terms of pay, in terms of different positions, and so when you do an alignment like this, we're going to have to look at those internal comparisons in terms of how they're classified and do they fit right. And if we start doing some overlap of position and responsibilities, how do we make sure those are equitable in terms of those relationships? So that's going to have, you know, we're going to have to engage our personnel department in a lot of those discussions to make sure that that works.
And then, sorry, I have one more. Okay. When you're looking at streamlining procedures, because it seems like this is a really great opportunity to do that, will you be working with the departments to create a consolidated SOP for how to handle these? Because there are different issues, I think, that they address, but there are also ways to kind of funnel them together.
So what we're going to do is we're going to form cross-departmental committees in different parts of the operation, kind of matching what we talked about here, and we're going to work with them to help us develop those kinds of policies, those kind of goals, those kind of performance metrics to show that we are making progress in that. So we want employees engaged in this process, not just management and supervision, but into the employee ranks as well. We want to see that happen right from the beginning, and we want them engaged in those conversations. And obviously our administration will be involved in those as well.
So I look at the organization chart, and it seems like there might be some duplication with some departments we already have.
Right.
Like HR for one, finance. So how does that fit in with our other departments?
Now, actually, when the 47 employees got together, I think they started to identify some of those opportunities as well in terms of how we streamline those things. But again, these employee groups will be re-engaged, and we will be looking at all those things. And quite frankly, I will be asking those questions as well during that process. But again, I think when you start this kind of process, you need to quell kind of the rumor mill that goes on, you know, when this is all, which is why we deliberately went out and met with all the employees. And encourage them to be involved, encourage them to challenge us, encourage them to ask us questions. And I tried to say, like I said, to script a little bit, despite my tendency to jump off of it, because I'm sure that there's going to be employees watching this tonight, and I wanted them to see that I was telling you the same things that I told the employees.
So
for
all
consistency.
the departments that I see on this flow chart, are those each a separate department, or is that just a?
That's a concept right now. That's going to evolve as time goes on. That's just the start of a conversation. It doesn't mean that that's the way this is going to look. You'll see that more refined. But at some point, you have to expose this to the employees. At some point, I have to expose this to the commission, make sure that they're supportive of my efforts to accomplish this before we really get down and spend a whole lot more on this process. But from a manager standpoint, you know, Brian back here talks about being the geek in finance and how he likes certain things about finance. This is the sort of thing that I think managers really like to do. I mean, we've spent a lot of time here dealing with a lot of old issues and fixing things that needed to be fixed, but this is one of those issues progressively that I like to do in terms of making things really improve for a long period of time for the community. I think it's a big evolution for us.
Go ahead.
That org chart, just to clarify, that's more of a functional, an inventory of functions.
Okay.
And we had a report that we submitted to Tom at the end of that focus group process, and presented those functions over a 17-page report. And so trying to figure out a way to synthesize that into a visual to provide a sort of a scope of what these departments do and where those alignments are naturally occurring resulted in that functional org chart. You know, I will say things like financial administration, human resources administration, even IT administration, a lot of that does occur at the department level throughout the organization in every department. And then, of course, we have the subject matter experts, you know, like Brian and his staff in finance, or Lori and her staff in human resources, that provide guidance and policies and procedures and compliance with those and with regulations as well. But a lot of the actual day-to-day, you know, whether it's processing invoices and payments and those sorts of things, or managing budgets or hiring processes, a lot of that happens at the department level.
Thanks, Brian.
And Tom, you talked about throughout this whole process and in everything you've done, it's been an attrition focus as opposed to layoffs, but kind of long-term through the attrition process, what do you see this strategy doing in terms of job elimination? Do you have a number in mind?
No. I think it would be premature to even go down that path. Because in part, Commissioner, I think our work evolves too. And one of the things that I think is a big selling point to our employees is just this exposure to a broader range of opportunities for them to consider. You know, if you're in solid waste and, you know, you don't see yourself doing that for your whole career, you can start to look around our operations. We've lost some really good employees to other operations in the metropolitan area. So I know we do a good job at training these employees and selecting these employees. And so, you know, having the mix of opportunities, I think, creates maybe a better work environment, a better opportunity for us to retain employees for a longer period of time. And so I don't want to create a kind of a threat either by suggesting, you know, that we can cut this number by such and such. I'm not sure that's really a wise thing to be focused on at this point. So, besides, I don't know. Flat out don't know what I would say that number would be, or if there is a number that would be.
I guess what I'm getting at is when you talk about efficiencies, obviously one of those efficiencies is from the city level, that when the two departments are put together, you can work much more efficiently, and as you said, above ground and below ground becomes
right.
one unit. Do you see that, though, as a financial efficiency for the city, though?
Yeah, I think there are some financial efficiencies.
So we're not growing something by combining it.
No, I think just the opposite. I think there will be financial efficiencies,
Okay.
and quite frankly, some of them will result from succession. I don't want to mislead you about that, but I have no idea what that particular number would be. But yes,
Okay.
I'm confident there would be some level of succession. My promise to the employees is that there wouldn't be a deliberate, you know, layoff in that regard. And so succession, I think, it's just a smarter management tool than layoff ever was, from what I can tell.
I agree. Thank you.
What are some of the biggest concerns you see with this whole idea? Do you have any pitfalls you see or concerns?
Well, having gone through some consolidations, I'd say you have to have some patience. Mm-hmm. You know, you combined building and planning departments, and I had done that as well. And one of the big reasons that I was a big advocate for the one-stop shop is I saw what a huge difference it made. And we had the planning department and the building department in the same building. But when we put them on the same floor, just the connections. You know, you think with technology that you get all of this collaboration through technology. I see more collaboration when you have relationships. And relationships don't necessarily build through technology, in my opinion. I think you have to have some level of face-to-face with people, be in the same room, hear some of the same conversations. You know, the whole design of offices has changed around that very theory, is that putting people together and they're hearing each other and talking to each other and hearing problems and hearing citizens interact with them and what those issues are. So I think that's where this will go eventually. You know, having those cross connections with people is a big advantage.
No, I was going to ask about the cons, but you already asked about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does any staff want to get up and say anything about it?
They're pretty shy.
I think so. Yeah, they're kind of asking them to step into it there.
I'm going to see a few more words.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And probably some of the things that some of the staff are talking about, because everybody who's here right now, at least, we're involved in multiple, if not every one of the focus groups. Going back to Commissioner Herbert's question about efficiencies and attrition of positions, you know, one of the conversations that happen in every one of the focus group meetings, and happens on a daily basis really in my working with these departments, is what aren't we doing, and how are we gonna accomplish those things that we aren't doing. And I think everybody here can point to numerous things that we would like to do, that we feel we should do, we maybe even have an obligation to do, but we're not doing. And so then you talk about service level enhancements. You know, you can't just depend on the annual budget process and additional appropriations in order to accomplish service level enhancements anymore. Maybe we used to do that in the past when Lawrence was one of the top 5 fastest growing communities in the country, but we can't do that anymore. We have to figure out new ways of accomplishing service level enhancements. So when we talk about efficiencies, you know, a lot of that is TBD, but we'll start identifying those and providing, you know, mechanisms to report those out to the City Commission. And then I'd say in some of our preliminary conversations so far, you know, unintended consequences, so impact on ancillary or related processes. You know, when you make position changes or even location changes of personnel, we have to think through what those unintended consequences are on other parts of the operation. For example, planning and development services. A lot of these positions in these departments support those types of functions. And then the third thing I'd say is, in terms of challenges, it's not a concern, but it's going to be a challenge to work through. And it's something that our organization, at least internally, has danced around for a long time, is cost allocation. And when we talk with some other organizations, some other cities, municipalities that are more mature in their merged model, cost allocation always comes up. And so our ability to leverage those, you know, the laundry list of funds and do that in a way that's legal and practical and sustainable, we're going to need to really address that issue of cost allocation. So, you know, those are things, you know, I don't anticipate we'll be 100% with the 2019 budget proposal. Obviously, that's a complex exercise, but you'll see that more and more at the commission level, some of those changes as we work through them.
Thank you, Brandon. I guess we'll open it to public comment. Any public comment on this item? All right.
Start drawing names and making them speak.
I guess we'll bring it back up here. Any other thoughts on this?
I'm glad that Tom is using an attrition-based approach as we talk about efficiencies. I mean, nobody wants to work in an environment where they constantly feel like they're the next budget cut. And unfortunately, you know, that happens a lot when you have a fixed amount of money in a budget and it's kind of a zero-sum game theory begins to be tossed around. So I appreciate that that's been the perspective. I think from, you know, a city staff morale standpoint, that's crucial that it be done that way. We can't have people coming to work every day wondering if they're getting laid off because of the MSO, you know, approach that's happening. So I do appreciate that.
Well, I can just say this was one of our critical success factors that I had really honed in on even during the election. I thought it was really important when we set it up at the strategic planning. And so I'm really glad to see this start to come together. Just looking at the documents, I can't imagine the amount of work that's been done, the number of meetings, and I really appreciate the work. And I look forward to seeing how this all comes together.
Yeah, I'm thankful for what seems like a really thoughtful process and that it's being done laterally and not just from the top down. This is what's happening, like creating that buy-in is 90% of that work. And if that isn't the case, you know, I feel like staff has an opportunity to come and speak with us, and that will probably continue to be the case as we continue to work on the budget. So I'm just really impressed by that, and being a process person, just looking at everything that has gone into the process and continues to go into that process, it seems very thorough.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that getting the employees involved with it and not just the supervisors, you know, is really important, of course. So it's something that they're shaping and not something being done to them, you know, that's important. And also from the election a couple of years ago, even, you know, talking about silos was really kind of a big deal at that time and still exists. But collaboration is just so important, especially for innovation to occur. There has to be collaboration. So I'm interested to see how this goes, and I hope it's everything that we want it to be.
If we have good engagement, it will be.
Okay, I think that brings to conclusion our meeting tonight. Thank you very much for.
Thank you.
Sticking around.
Yeah, thank you.